Okay, thank you very much for inviting me and giving me the possibility to talk about quality from a more, let's say, narrow perspective, that one of cultural heritage. Why do we care so much about the issue of Baukultur in the cultural heritage field is obvious. I don't have to go through this. It has been discussed already. But aside from the general reasons that make cultural heritage an important topic of the discussion on Baukultur, I think it's good to see also local and regional issues and perspectives that will give us a broader understanding of what we need to do in order to further the discussion on quality and on Baukultur. So from our perspective in Romania, and I think even broadly in Eastern Europe, there are several considerations to make that affect not just our cultural heritage, but entirely our built environment. And I just put here a few of them, the extensive demolitions that happened in our cities and to a certain degree in the countryside as well. In the last part of the communist regime, probably Romania is a special case in this respect. And this phenomenon of transformation of the built environment in order to transform a society has reached a very high degree in the 1980s. Then we have inappropriate modern interventions in historic contexts after the change of regime. And we can think of all sorts of examples, like, for instance, introducing high-rise buildings in low-scale historic environments with all the changes that this brings in use, in perception, and in scale. We also have cases of destructive interventions on historic buildings, due to all sorts of reasons. I will discuss a few. And last, something which is quite worrying, destructive conservation interventions. So conservation interventions that go terribly wrong. And unfortunately, these happen. And it is something that has been noted in the entire region of Eastern Europe recently out of various reasons. So just briefly a few illustrations of what I said, what dramatically changed our built environment in the 1980s once the communist regime decided to remove entire historic quarters and demolish historic buildings, or sometimes just move them out of sight. To make room for new developments that were to change the entire society. This was something that has very long-term implications, and it's one of the problems that we have to deal with even now. And as I said, it didn't happen only in the large cities, but it had started to happen in the countryside as well, with the notorious by now program of systematization of villages that Ceausescu launched in the late 80s, which was supposed to remove about 600 to 800 villages and replace them with urbanized centers. And this it's an interesting case also of European solidarity and cooperation that was born out of this crazy project with the Opération Village Roumain, the movement that was initiated in Belgium and then extended in much of Western Europe, that is still active today as a network of cooperation between local communities. This phenomenon of raising the past and recreating a new built framework for a new society was happening, as I said, in many urban centers across Romania, but obviously in Bucharest it was the most large scale and dramatic. About a fifth of historic Bucharest has been demolished, and you see a picture here with the transition process. What you see in the lower part of this large picture doesn't exist anymore. It's exactly in those years, 1984, 1986, when the historic center was being demolished to make room for this People's Palace and the entire new political and administrative center of the country. So we cannot deny this. And as I said, it has implications down to this day, very serious ones, and it has also echoes, because the large church that you see is being constructed now as we speak. People's Palace, Ceausescu's palace, is dwarfed by the new huge building. Fortunately, it's in one of the empty spaces left by the demolition, so it didn't produce any more trauma to the historic fabric. What's interesting in this picture, you see the transition from the domestic scale of the historic city that existed and up to these immeasurate projects. Other things happen inside the historic fabric, as everywhere else. It's not Romania the only case. I've just read this morning about a complaint in London about Richard Rogers Partnership building that is supposed to stand on top of a historic building like that. But what is worrying, of course, is the transformation that the historic fabric, with all its qualities in terms of habitability, in terms of social network and relationships, and in terms, of course, of character, is suffering because of these transformations. And as I said, there are also these odd cases of destructive conservation works that transform very significant and full of character historic monuments into scale models of imagined historic architecture with no authenticity any longer and with no cultural value, moving rather towards the entertainment area than to the cultural area. And as I said, this is also a phenomenon that is happening quite alarmingly, and it has been facilitated, so to say, by the availability of European funding. Why? Because we are in an area where the public system for the protection of cultural heritage has been chronically underfunded. And all of a sudden, significant funding became available, and that backfired in many ways. And that's why I'm saying it's rather a regional issue, and it has to do with quality and the mechanisms that make quality possible or not possible. Now, coming to the issue of how do we deal with this, with our problems in Romania, what do we try to do in order to fight all these problems? First, just a brief characterization. It's an undersized public system, understaffed, underfunded. That is general. It's also marked by the impossibility to ensure appropriate response to the needs of the society in terms of the protection of cultural heritage because of the above reasons, and also the impossibility to involve the public out of the same reasons, the lack of capacity to build a relationship and start working together with the public. And what do we do? Well, we have in Romania, we have started, let's say, a rather ambitious program of transformation of the entire system of protection of cultural heritage, starting with the redefinition of the principles on which we lay our actions, and with the attempt to integrate the new concepts and frameworks, like, for instance, the concept of heritage community that is introduced by the Faro Convention of the Council of Europe and that is operationalized by the Strategy 21 and other tools. And then we have started to design a new legal framework, a heritage code that will bring together all the laws in the field that now are developed over time in various moments under various political contexts and with different approaches. Now they are going to be integrated into one heritage code. And at the same time, there's another urban planning code that is being developed, and the two should be really integrated. So we are seeking to achieve a transversal approach and move out of the closed circle of culture heritage professionals. And we are also creating new instruments because it's very little likely that the lack of staff that we are suffering of will improve. It's a general trend everywhere to decrease the public system, so we are not expecting miracles in this respect. So we want to create new tools, and we have started to design a new online platform that will serve as a basic tool in terms of ensuring the inventory of cultural heritage, the official inventory, but will also perform the function of communication with the people that are interested in cultural heritage. And we are embedding into this platform the possibility for each person or group to create their own inventory for their own purposes. For instance, associations that deal with historic houses or those deal with religious heritage, they will have the possibility to create their inventories based on the tool that we provide. And thus, we will benefit from the information and also from communication and, in the end, cooperation with these groups of society that are involved with cultural heritage. So we are trying to make use of what modern IT and C technology can bring. And last but not least, also procedures and concrete actions. Of course, we are, and when we speak of procedures, we have launched the preparatory phases for the first architecture competitions that will happen within the public system for the protection of cultural heritage. So we are preparing an architecture competition for the medieval city walls of Sighișoara, one of our World Heritage sites. And this is going to be launched at the end of this year. And in the meantime, we are doing the preparations. Looking for quality also with the tools of architecture competitions there where we can, because sometimes conservation is to a very high extent a technical, highly technical endeavor. And then other concrete actions like pilot projects, for instance, in another World Heritage site, Sarmizegetuza Regia, the capital of the ancient Dacian kingdom. There we created an international scientific committee for the project of the restoration of the site. And the project is done by our institute, so we are trying to solve the problem of highly specialized capacities by means of also using these scientific committees. And practically what we've done in the past 2 years, we have our institute, the National Institute of Heritage, we have launched this theme of quality in the public space, taking advantage of two situations, so to call them, two potentially very, very helpful situations, like the European Year of Cultural Heritage in 2018 and the Romanian presidency of the Council of the European Union now in the first 6 months of 2019. And within the framework of these two programs, we have organized two conferences, both of them dedicated to cultural heritage. And last year, within the forum and the preparatory debates, we have introduced the theme of quality in conservation in the public debate. And as a result, we have drawn, let's say, a list of the process of conservation of cultural heritage within the public system. How does the whole process go, and where are the problems, and how can we deal with these problems? I didn't translate the last column, which is with solutions. Those are purely local and not necessarily so interesting, but the other two are. So starting with preparation, where you establish the necessity for a project, there we find the first problems because we lack strategic planning and programming so that we can integrate each project into a broader vision. So that's the first point where we already encounter a problem, and that also has to do with the lack of professional staff in the public administration where these kind of strategic planning should happen. And then I will just go briefly, I will point to some of the issues. In the design process, where you select a planner, and then you have to apply the public procurement procedures. And this is already a problem because generally public procurement is used in the simplest way in order to put the lowest burden on the contracting authority. And that means that very often the lowest price is applied as a procedure for procurement. So no quality at all, just price. Very often as well, the time frame for the development of the procedures, not the procedures, but the services, the planning services, the design is too short, is extremely short sometimes, and that already creates a problem from the very beginning of the project. And then also it's the permitting and approval phase that is really very, very difficult because of over-bureaucratization of the system. It has become very bureaucratic and very little connected to the reality on the ground. And then, of course, when we talk of funding, now I'm especially speaking of European funding, and here it's important how you design the funding programs, how each country designs their programs. And in our case, the criteria used and the objectives for the programs were mistaken from the beginning. For instance, in the previous programming period, one of the objectives, the targets of the funding was number of tourists. So where's the quality? If you just aim for increasing the number of tourists. And now it has changed, but this is something that influences a lot the quality. And then in the implementation phase, there's again the procurement, because you need to hire a contractor. And if when we speak of planning, at least the law allows the quality criterion to be used in procurement, when we speak of construction, it doesn't. In Romania, the transposition of the European Directive on Procurement was done in such a way that it excludes quality criteria when we speak of construction. They consider that planning ensures, the design ensures, guarantees the quality, which is obviously totally wrong. But again, it comes from a system that is purely bureaucratic, and it doesn't really respond to the realities. And then in post-implementation, especially I will just refer to maintenance and repair, they just don't exist in our legal framework. So it's impossible to maintain a quality built environment without these basic measures of maintenance and repair. And about the factors that lead to these problems, well, I just put up a list of a few of them, 8. So it's legal, normative, administrative, professional, financial, ethical, and political. And all of them need to be addressed in order to improve the situation. And I'm not going to dwell on everything that's there, but just for instance, when we talk of normative, I will say that in the structural planning for the conservation of historic architecture, nowadays we apply the norms for new buildings. So this is already a huge problem. We don't have specific norms that deal with cultural heritage, with built heritage, and the application of norms designed for new building is impossible. And I will just stop briefly at the financial one again and say that We also lack fiscal incentives. There is an obvious imbalance between the rights and responsibilities of owners of built heritage. They are bearers of duties, of responsibilities, but they don't have too many rights and neither incentives from the state. We do have a national funding program for the conservation of cultural heritage, but that excludes private owners, so it only applies to state property. And that is a huge imbalance, and we are working to fix it. And then under ethical, where of course there's space for much more, I just pointed the excessive interventions that are possible due to large amounts of money under European funds. Normally, within the program that we fund, the National Conservation Program with state funding, a conservation work might be, let's say, less than €1 million. That's the rule, the average funding that we offer. Whilst in European funding, you all of a sudden get access to 5, or if it's a UNESCO site, then €10 million for one project. And that led to all sorts of unnecessary additions to the built environment. And political, there's a lot to say there. I just put one very inoffensive thing, which is common probably in many places. Lack of political will to address the problem, really, and work on it. And during the conference that we organized just 1 month ago in Sighișoara, we addressed the issue of quality in a different way, looking at regional specificity. So we try to get to the point where we make the distinction between what is valuable in local and regional specificity and needs to be preserved, and what is wrong practice and needs to be solved. And we worked on the so-called drivers of quality in heritage practices that were, I just jumped over this, that were developed during the European Year of Cultural Heritage by ICOMOS and the European Commission, who organized a working group on quality. And they have produced a document that is due to appear this month. And they dwelt on these drivers of quality. But what we did was to address the drivers from this regional perspective and see what's there that is different in the east and west, in the south and north. And there's a lot to say, of course, but I will just try to be very brief and say that the conclusions were that we need to do more comparative analysis to understand better what's the specificity, what's good in it and what's bad. And this was a general conclusion. And then another one was the need to extend cooperation on various levels, because for now, of course, we do cooperate in the European Union on projects mostly, but we concluded that it's important to have structural cooperation between institutions, similar institutions, state institutions dealing with cultural heritage from one country and another, to embark on joint projects so that we can activate peer learning, and that was one of the, I think, most important conclusions. Then the application of legal and normative instruments, because over the last years, especially since 2014, the European Parliament and the European Commission have produced a large number of very important documents dealing with cultural heritage. Council conclusions, resolutions of the Parliament, declarations like the Davos, and then they need to be implemented, of course. We have already a large body of normative work that we need to apply, and then to integrate into the national legislation, then to further engage the world of business in everything that relates to cultural heritage, because we tend to talk among ourselves, professionals, and business is very rarely integrated into our projects. And then The issue of inclusion and accessibility, of course, for whom we are doing all this. It's easy to say society, community, but really we need to address better the issues of accessibility. And then to improve and refine the financial instruments that we have. We are now in the process of creation of the next European multi-annual financial framework. So this is a moment when we need to integrate all these desires and requirements for quality Baukultur into the next financial framework. And to increase capacities in education and training, because the lack of professional staff, it's not just in Romania, it's everywhere, but of course in different proportions. So this is an issue that is of utmost importance. And last one, to engage the civil society, because it's very often for the public sector, it's the most valuable partner that we neglect. And we need to further engage the civil society. And just to put it in a few words, we concluded that we need more institutions, more NGOs, more dialogue, and more cooperation. Thank you.